Welcome to Red's Business and Technology Podcast, the first one for 2025. And I've got a very, very welcome old friend to the business of Red, Darren Hopkins here, the Godfather of Cyber. Darren, thank you so much for being our first guest for this year.
I'm very happy to be back, and I think this is now the trilogy.
That's right, yeah.
We've done this a couple of times before. I always love coming in and having this conversation.
Oh, look, Darren, I love everything you do. You know, you're genuinely passionate about helping businesses of all sizes be protected by, something that's ever increasing. And, this is the Godfather series part 3, I'd like to say, Godfather of Cyber, Darren Hopkins. So, Darren, look, no need to introduce you. Everyone knows that you're the best in the business, but tell us, what are you seeing? Since we last caught up, where's the world going in cyber? Are we winning the battle, losing the battle? Just share what you've been seeing.
Look, I don't think we're going backwards. That's a good thing. I had to think about what the last 12 months has looked like since we've done the last one of these. What's changed? What have we seen? I tend to normally go and think about what incidents have I done, because incidents quite often tell me what a business is doing to protect themselves and where are we falling victim and what are we not doing enough of. And we had plenty of interesting incidents come through last year into the business. The thing I like about an incident, and people think we're crazy because we deal in that world of crisis, is you get lessons learned that you would never ever get without actually being through the crisis and actually coming out the other end, and then having an opportunity to think about, okay, what happened, why did it happen, and how do we fix it? So if you can start to take some of those lessons and then bring them forward. Last year I saw a lot of good movements in the things that we've been talking about in the various conversations we've had. In our previous podcast, we talked about what are the things that businesses need to actually start to do and implement and change to reduce the likelihood of these things happening. I'm seeing that, which is great.
Awesome.
I'm also seeing the people we're protecting ourselves from taking some lessons learned, adapting their own businesses and their business models, and being better at attacking us. And that's not great. I'd love to say that I saw this huge shift in good cybersecurity across the spectrum. We didn't. We saw a lot of good movement, but there's still a lot to be done. And we're still seeing, even right up until the end of the year, the basics are still there and not being sort of focused on yet. We've still got this little conversation that seems to pop up, which is security versus convenience. I don't want to do something because it's not convenient.
Yep.
And we're still looking at some businesses and some organisations struggling to see the value in spending on security, and it's a hard one. If you go off and invest in some security products or support or some work in that space, and you get through a year and nothing happened, you should basically see huge amounts of value. I had no event happen. That's great. It's just working, as opposed to what we've quite often seen, which is, well, nothing really happened. I mean, do we need to spend that money? There's this assumption that you just dodged a bullet. And I even heard a story this week, which was quite scary. A business had a ransomware event last year, quite bad, went through it all. We're insured, great. So they actually had an insurer and a range of other experts helping them through. Have read some statistics that say, if it's your time, it's usually 1 in a 10-year event, so they didn't renew their insurance. We've had our event, we're okay now, we'll save some money. And they got hit again about 3 months after not renewing that policy and had to do it themselves this time. So, a little bit of everything. We always are looking to try to capture information about what's actually happening. And for a number of years, we've been recording information about ransomwares in the country, something we're quite passionate about. I think I've spoken about this in a previous podcast when we sort of said, well, why did we do it? And it all started with experiencing businesses having to find huge sums of money to pay organised crime.
Yep.
And with a former background in law enforcement, that really bugs me. I mean, if we are basically paying organised crime and building an ecosystem to harm us, it doesn't make any sense. So we were tracking that data, and we've done our research again, and we do the research with YouGov. This year we went out to more than 500 businesses in Australia of deliberately different sizes. The research is often criticised, interestingly enough, by my peers in the market. I've seen some interesting feedback on that is not what we see, and I'd expect that to be the case. We've deliberately tried to do a piece of research that looks at small businesses, medium businesses, large and enterprise. Most of my peers, and including our firm sometimes, we tend to only see maybe large businesses falling victim, those that can afford big insurance policies, someone that can have an incident response team on demand. So our view is skewed. We don't see small business. We don't get an opportunity to help not-for-profits all the time as much as we'd like. And in a country where 90% or more than 90% of our businesses are small, we were never seeing that. So we deliberately wanted to see what is the real focus across the country of this issue. And that's why our stats seem almost alarmist when you start to look at them. And I brought some copies with me today. So this year we saw an increase in our stats from previous years. So for a while it was going down, which is great.
Yep.
Less people falling victim, less people paying. What we've gone back in this year, we're back up to about 69% of the businesses that were surveyed have actually had a ransomware attack in the last 5 years. That's way too high. More importantly, what we've sort of pulled out of this one, and when you have a look at it, is more than 80% of them decided to pay a ransom. Now that's the stat that you don't want to see. So if you fell victim, there was a good chance that they were going to pay, and that's gone up.
And usually they're paying that ransom because they've got no other choice, right? They don't have the backups, they don't have the hygiene. Literally that's the only way they're going to survive.
Yeah, and we've asked the question why. I mean, that's really important. Connecting that to that point, previously last year we were making payments to, because we're Australian businesses and Australians have generally got this great culture of wanting to help people. That's what we're known for. So it was about, well, if I pay this, I'm going to minimise harm to others. I'm not going to make it any worse. I'm not going to see their data get leaked onto the dark web. I'm not going to have this, my incident causing further harm, and all I'm being asked to do is pay money to reduce that likelihood. So there was a lot of decision making at boards and executives around that seems like the right thing to do. And funny enough, our insurer's got to cover the payment. That sort of legitimises it a little bit. And at the same time, it feels like something that we need to do to remediate this. And as long as it's legal and we can do it, and we're told that there's nothing wrong with it, that would be the play. This year it changed a bit. Disruption was one of the reasons we were paying. And to your point, we're seeing these groups getting really good at when they get into your systems, causing lots of damage, taking out your backups, being able to come back in over and over again.
Yep.
So you might start to fix it, and then someone will come back in and unwind all that work, and actually going through and shutting your business down. That interruption is real. Every day you can't trade. Every day there's no systems. There's a cost. And we've even seen this year some businesses, who were not able to get on top of the attacking, and it continued. So it's not just one, they're in and they're out, and then you have to make a choice. They were coming in day after day, and to the point where we've just got to stop it.
Cripple the business. Yeah.
Yep. So we can pay and it'll stop.
Yeah, wow. So it's interesting. So that's a really worrying stat, which I'd like to drill on a bit further. So 80% have paid ransom last year?
84% of businesses that suffered a ransomware in the past 5 years paid it.
Wow, that's scary.
And we're up to 1.35 is the average payment now.
1.35 million. Yeah,
million,
right.
yeah. So significant. When we have a look at the underlying stats, there are some small payments. You're not going to get a small business asked to pay $1 million. They can't find that money. The payment amount will be something that's reasonable that someone can get. But if you're a bigger business, they're going to ask for millions. And the stats actually showed some significantly large payments that were made that sort of pushes that stat up. We asked businesses, what would you be willing to pay? That's a different question. So if you said, just assume you haven't had an incident and you fell victim, and that was there, what would you as a business be willing to pay? It was 1.4 million. They're willing to pay more than the actual average. And that sort of goes a little bit to the sort of thought process around why. And we run tabletop simulations and exercises all the time to give businesses an opportunity to practice incident response.
Yep.
Don't make your first incident response the real one. Go in, simulate it, try it, make sure your plans are working, make sure your technical teams know what they're doing. Does disaster recovery work? Are your backups there? So that's great.
Well, not only that, just know who to call. Like I say that to people, like if your systems are hacked and your phones are down, do you know the phone number of who you're going to call?
Yeah, and there's a big team you need to call.
Yeah.
You need your service provider. You need your IT teams. They need to be, because they'll be working around the clock. You need some incident responders.
Yeah.
You might need comms and legals. All of those things come together, so you have to do that. When we're having a look at some of the stats that were sitting around the actual, what are you going to do and how quickly, there was some stats there saying that, well, we'll pay quicker now. We will absolutely negotiate with threat actors. That was a very common thing. There's a lot of reasons why. And those simulations we do, most of them we get to the point where even I can justify that negotiating with the threat actor is probably a good thing.
Yep.
There's a lot to be gained. Don't want you to pay, but certainly sometimes there's definitely benefits in doing that. And I think we've gone to this spot now where it's a little bit too easy. Been talking to various law enforcement groups, and they're sort of asking questions as well. Why are we so willing to do this? And how do we better engage with organisations that need their help because it is there for them? And how do we remind organisations that there are mechanisms to make a phone call where you might have the federal police come in to do what we want them to do, which is actually investigate who's responsible and shut them down. And we're not seeing enough of that either.
We'll talk about legislation changes. What other findings have you got from your update?
Well, one interesting thing that came out of it is we were thinking, leading up to this, there was all this talk about this new ransomware bill that was coming out, which was a cybersecurity bill, which actually had mandatory reporting of ransom payments. So you now, if you make a payment, a ransom payment, and you are within the grounds of that new act, so you're a business of the right size, you have to tell the government if you pay. So that's the new law, so great. The expectation, I think, was that that's going to stop people paying. If you have to tell someone that you're doing it, you can't hide it, that's not a great thing. We asked the question, majority of people thought that you should pay. You should be telling them anyway. So there was no issue with telling anyone. And we had 79% of the business leaders say it should be mandatory to report ransomware. So we already had the majority of businesses happy to tell. So that legislation of reporting probably won't shift the dial as much. I already know some businesses that have already paid, and when we said, well, you have to, there's an obligation to now say this, that's fine. We'll do that. What else do we have in here? We had certainly an acknowledgement of the brand damage that occurs. And that's also one of the things that we're trying to do. If you can go off and deal with this quickly, you can minimise brand damage. 65% of the businesses actually paid negotiated. That's a weird stat, actually. I'd be suggesting if you're going to pay, 100% of you should negotiate.
Yeah.
I mean, don't pay more than you have to.
Negotiate with the threat actors. Maybe that's a new business. I'm a tab. I'm a threat actor broker. So.
Well, there's discounts to be had. Yeah. It's in a lot of the negotiations we've watched and seen run through, you will get a discount. If you're looking to pay, hire a negotiator. They're out there. That's what they do. And they will often get your 40% discount.
Yeah, wow.
So it's no different to going to JB Hi-Fi. Don't pay what's on the ticket. Go and talk to someone.
What does it ask for a JB deal? So.
Yep, they'll sort you out. But yeah, so there was those things, and a lot of the payments were done quickly too. In quite often, this whole process was played out in 48 hours.
And are insurance companies, are they reducing the, I guess if they're willing to pay the ransom, more underwriters saying no, or is it just status quo? All of them are still able to do it?
There's always been restrictions in whether or not they'll refund you. So an insurer won't pay your ransom.
You pay it and
they'll refund you. There's always been fine print that they will not touch a sanctioned entity. Yep. So if they're a terrorist organisation or on a sanctions list, no, you can't. And actually, when you're talking about legalities, you can't go off and pay terrorists. You can't pay a sanctioned entity. That is actually against the law. So you still got to make sure you're allowed to do these things. Then when you sort of step back into, okay, well, I can make a payment. There's a whole lot of sort of ways of determining how that's going to happen, and you got to get a negotiator in who will do that for you. You got to do it yourself.
Do you have stats on percentage of, I guess, countries that are doing more of these attacks? Because I know when we last caught up, there was a fair bit from the Eastern Bloc. Is it tend to be there, or is it shifting around the world to different resource centres? Or
we still see. Last year, was a lot of the groups changed. So we're seeing a lot of new groups coming through. Some of the older ones disappearing. Law enforcement was very successful in disrupting quite a lot of groups last year. So you see the traditional ones that you used to start to disappear a little bit. Lockbit was an example of one of the bigger groups that was heavily disrupted. It still seems to be certain countries through that part of Europe that are responsible for a lot of them.
Yep.
You tend to not see a nation state attacking a business or doing that for the purpose of making money. Quite different reasons for those types of things. Anyone that was watching the US elections, playing through, may have seen some press around Salt Typhoon, which was effectively allegations that Chinese hacking teams were actually attacking various parts of the US to try to get information to influence
Yep.
the actual elections over there. That's a normal thing. Yep, a lot of the information coming out of countries like North Korea indicate that, yes, they've got great teams doing these things for two reasons. One is to make money, and the other one is to have an offensive capability in this space as well. What we did see change, though, was at the lower end of what used to be something that most businesses may have seen, which is a business email compromise, where you lose your email account and a fraud is facilitated through that. You either pay something you shouldn't, or someone tries to change bank accounts, or at some point someone loses money. We saw those attacks getting better, much better. And we started to see AI coming to the mix now, and AI being used to help create documents that look real, or make sure the language in the email communications is better.
And even deep fakes too, you know, call someone to validate it, but it's actually AI.
And there's great tech, voices, video, all those things are good. And we'll see more of that, I think. We haven't seen a huge amount of it, but it's certainly there. There was some news, it was in the Courier Mail not too long ago, and it was in a lot of the other news groups as well, in relation to a case that's gone through the court on one of these business email compromises, where a business has lost their email account, and the threat actor has gotten into that and then tried to defraud somebody else. The business they were trying to defraud fell victim to it. So they tried to do some good things. They tried to make phone calls to validate bank accounts they couldn't get through. In the end, they made the payment and they lost that money.
Yep.
That's gone all the way through courts. Now, the business that lost the email account, that had someone in it, no doubt, they've lost control of the email. That the person that was using that account was a threat actor from somewhere else. They're the ones that have sent all of the fake emails and managed to coerce this. The business that paid has now been, through the courts, said, I'm sorry, that's on you. Even though they had been hacked, and yes, that other business's account should have been secured, and that's what's happened, it's on you to actually control your side of that equation. So it's your responsibility to make sure you don't pay. And that was not something we were expecting. If someone's clearly had their account taken over and someone's using it to attack you, and it's a real account, so you can't stop that email coming through because it's a real email, your system won't detect it as being fake because it's not, it's real. And as long as the language and everything else is good, it's really hard for your people to know that's not real. And that's what they rely upon. It's still on you to make sure that you do everything to make sure that you don't make that payment.
Wow, yeah.
So it's just something for all of us. And where you have those relationships with clients where it's very familiar and you've been working with them for years, and you maybe get into that part where I've got a regular payment going through and you're not too worried, you still need to challenge almost every time just to make sure you check. Yeah,
we've spoken about supply chain risk, like we've seen this, I think, probably in the last 6 months, I'd say most of the impacts that we've had to be involved in remediation have all come from some sort of supply chain risk. Down the chain has caused an issue that, and there's just, use the word familiarity, like people just, take things for granted, So what can you give an example, I guess, to the people here listening? Most of the people that, listen and watch are business owners or business leaders, and desensitized. What's one of the worst, examples that you've seen that could have been mitigated?
Oh, there's so many. I'll pull together safely a story which is quite recent. So many aspects of one of our attacks could have probably been stopped. And when the business has a think about it, they're already making changes. So we saw an attack that started with something as simple as someone looking for a job. So an email comes through saying, hey, I'm looking for a job. I live 4 or 5 hours north of where you are. I'm moving into the city. Love to have an opportunity to work for you. I've seen what you do. Great. Sends an email through. In the email, it might suggest, I've been told that a good way to actually to have a job is to have a website with my CV on it to show you that I've got some tech skills and I'm serious about this. I've done that. I'd really appreciate if you'd have a look at my CV, and if there's any opportunities, let me know.
Actually, I get those emails probably once a week.
And go-getter. Great. Someone is proactive, pushing through. Went to the right person, went to somebody who's in talent acquisition, all great. So then what we then see is the next step is you can't click on the link in the email, because deliberately what they've done is they don't want Microsoft to scan it as a link. So someone copies and pastes it into Google, and it'll actually find the website. And the website's a genuine CV. It looks great. And there's a click on my CV to download it. That's the scary thing, because then immediately then that was actually what looked like a CV, eventually displayed a CV, but in between actually put some malware onto the machine. So, first lesson.
Sneaky.
Yeah. Don't just, we always say don't click on things and don't just do things. Just don't assume that something's correct. There's obviously some controls around being able to run things you couldn't. And then moving forward, there was a whole lot of things that came through. So from a supply chain perspective, lots of vendors coming in to support the business, lots of ways to get into the business, more than one way to come in. And a lot of those ways of coming into the business, the threat actor worked out how to get in and effectively gave themselves 6 or 7 ways to keep coming back in. Then what we have is, traditional things around administrators. When you have too many and too many people have got access,
big problem.
You start to lose control of those things. All of the good work you do around security can get unwound, and that was a factor there.
What industry, can I ask, was this in? Oh, if you can't say it, say it.
Probably not.
No, fair enough.
It's a fairly large organisation.
Okay.
Yep. And then, moving forward, you start to have a look at other things, which are, business continuity and can you recover quickly and those things. And it's not until you go through a crisis you get to see those things. On the fraud side, we still are seeing instances where businesses have a process in play. If you want to change a bank account, if you want to be a new vendor, you want to do these things, you follow a process. We still see instances where people just get relaxed and do one of 3 things, not the 3. Anything that's there designed to actually give you that safety net, you shouldn't bypass, and it still happens all the time.
Another episode of air crash investigations. Miss something and the plane crashes. Business dies.
Yeah. So we saw a lot of just different types of attacks last year that were just interesting and different. The threat actors, as we call them, they're getting really skilled. I mean, really skilled at being in a network and finding vulnerabilities and finding ways out.
Well, this is the challenge, right? So, they say as a consultant, you need to be one step ahead of your customer, right? But as a threat actor, you need to be one step ahead of, your customer, which is, trying to target a business. And then you've got, like what both our businesses do, try to help defend. And then we put in third-party products and solutions and we leverage everything to try and protect a business. But everyone's got to think they're going to be hacked at some stage. It's, to your point, those tabletop exercises which you guys do, I've sat into many of them, they're absolutely brilliant, right? So people that are listening or watching and haven't done it, 100% you need to be doing them and do them consistently, because, I know if someone said, I'll call my daughter, like I don't know her number off by heart, I've got it saved in here, and if I lose my phone, I've got to go trudging through, paperwork to do that. But are there things that I'll ask about the government in a minute, because I know that you're driving a lot of change through, SMB and DSI and all that, but what are we fundamentally failing at? Like as a business, I know that, you can have a primary, secondary, tertiary, multiple backups. Like, every business is digital. You cut the digital, you cut the oxygen. How do people stop this from happening? Or let me rephrase, how do you mitigate this from happening? If
we had the silver bullet, I guess we'd both be on a beach having this podcast right now.
We'll still be doing it.
As we say, there's some fundamental simple things you need to do that reduce the likelihood of it. And I think we're still in the world of it's not if it's going to happen, but when. So you need to assume that something's going to happen and be ready for it. So if that's the assumption, firstly, deal with your identity in your system. So if you give everyone an account to come in, make sure that account is safe, that only they can use it. I mean, that goes to password hygiene and multi-factor and all of those things. And make sure that account can only do what you want it to do, so you don't overprivilege it. That's a great start, because that's minimizing what you should do. Then we look at segmentation in our IT systems. So if everything doesn't need to see everything, don't let it. So if a system should only need to see its own little group of things, then segment it and protect it, so you can't keep jumping from system to system. And we see that threat actors get in once and they can see everything. Then they go off and move through, because ultimately what they're trying to do is steal information to extort you. And then blow up your system so they can disrupt you. So that's the standard approach they use, and you can actually minimize the damage on those things. The other thing is being able to have enough technology to detect it. One thing that was consistent I saw through the last 12 months is in a lot of the cases we investigated, we saw alerts to show that the threat actors were in. We saw alerts sitting in log files. We saw alerts sitting in antivirus programs or endpoint detection programs that your technology had worked and it had seen something.
But no one was active.
No one was looking. and no one was actioning those things. And that was just a straight up miss.
Yeah.
Because if you'd actioned it when those alerts had popped up, it was often weeks before the incident. And then we write so many reports where we say, look, you've got to have the technology and the controls, yes, and you've got to make sure that you are looking at all the information that's going to tell you something's going wrong and know what to look for. But more importantly, you've got to action it. And no one's spending, not a lot of businesses are taking that last little investment step, which is put a team around it. Look all the time. It's not a business hours issue either. I would love it if threat actors only made us have to work Monday to Friday. But it's normally, I think my team starts to get stressed at about 3:00 on a Friday.
Yeah, that's why we're doing the podcast today, because otherwise I know I'd never catch you at the end of the week. So it's interesting, right? This is probably a common theme in part 3 of this, but challenges basically drive change, right? So when a business is challenged, they drive change. Once you've been through an impact or a cyber hack, that's when you actually become the CFO sign in everything, wants to put everything in place. But government's trying hard, and I know you've been really at the forefront of advising and being on panels and all of that. Like, talk to us a bit about what's happening in that space and how businesses are, because I know we've been pushing cyber and people are interested, but I also feel that there's a bit of lethargy with owners in going, oh look, it won't happen to me, and we still get frustrated. Hence the reason why we do this podcast and get VIPs like you, and it's not because we're actually we're doing this for the sake of it. We need to help businesses because we've seen so many good little businesses that have died because they just don't understand. It's an education process. But share with me where the government's going and what you've been able to influence there.
I'll try not to get myself in trouble here because government's my friends across all. It's interesting. If we look at federal government, let's look at the group that's supposed to protect our country and does a really good job of that. Our interactions with a lot of those groups are excellent, and there is so much being done to try to protect businesses and protect our country. Home Affairs, Australian Signals Directorate, ACSC, Australian Federal Police, these groups are proactively out there trying to support us. Quite often we won't reach out, we won't get support, we won't tell them or talk to them because we think that that's not the right thing to do. No, their job is to actually protect our country and to help us. So there needs to be more engagement there. And every time I've done a large matter or even a smaller matter where we've had those engagements, excellent. They're also the groups that are helping build good legislation that should try to help the problem and minimise the risks. So we talked about a cybersecurity bill. There's some great changes coming through there. They're putting rigour around issues such as doxing. They did put in the mandatory reporting on a ransom payment. Didn't say we can't pay. There was no banning of payments, but we need to be more open about talking about that. And then there's all of the help, support that comes from those things if you engage with them. So that's at a federal level, excellent. Then there's the regulators. The regulators, if I look at, we've got a Privacy Act, and we've got our other regulators there. They have rules in relation to how we manage and deal with these issues. The Privacy Act basically says it's about protecting individuals' private information. Incredibly important. That's what we're protecting, and that's what people are trying to steal. There's certainly a lot of effort going into enforcement of that act, and probably won't labour on it too much, but have a look at what's happened with Medibank and others, and maybe the fines that have been alleged and the approach that's going through in the investigations. That's what happens when it goes wrong, and that's the big stick approach. And maybe not getting the same traction. And often what I see is during an incident, during a time when you want someone to engage in work, they're so worried about the enforceable piece that a regulator may put in place, they will go into a shell and they'll get their lawyers and they'll protect themselves. Human nature. At a state government level, each of the states does different things. We're in Queensland, state government here, huge amount of investment, great teams, proactively looking to do different things to support all of their remit. So that's local government, state government, GOCs, anyone that can do that. But a lot of what they do is also just supporting businesses as well, because the programs they put in place are designed to actually help anyone who's in this state. The other states have got good programs as well. There has been, some of these changes come through in legislation that force different things to occur, and we have to refactor. At the moment, there is still no standard in this country for what good cybersecurity looks like. There's great advice. We have these ACSCs or ASDs Essential 8, and you'll find most cyber practitioners are an advocate of the essential eight really effective controls. But there's no governance there. There's no risk management. It's just 8 controls that minimise the risk of you having an incident. You should do those things, but it's not enough. So we do need our governments, state, federal, local, to start to call out what good looks like and actually give guidance on, hey, we want you to do this.
Yep.
So here's 10 things. And
you're working on that, right?
Well, absolutely. So one of the ways you do it is through standards and through frameworks. So one of the I'm lucky enough to work with and support Australian standard, which has now become an international standard. It was originally SMB 1001 being an Australian standard at the end of last year. It's been updated to Dynamic Standards International, still SMB 1001, but it is now a standard that's been picked up by other countries as an effective cybersecurity standard at multiple levels to support small and medium-sized businesses. And to be honest, it's effective for larger businesses as well. It's a great stepping stone to an international standard like ISO.
Fantastic.
Every year, it gets updated. Every year, a whole bunch of professionals, including government, experts, advisors. We've got advice from lawyers. We've got advice from the industry on what does good look like in cybersecurity, and we change it. Had a great debate recently where we're talking about what does good password hygiene look like. 2 years ago, we're saying, change your password often. Make it complicated, make it long and change it often. We're going, well, no. Maybe don't change it often. Just have a really strong, long, hard password and only change it when you know it needs changing. So don't force someone to have a bad habit of choosing the simple thing to remember because they've got to do it so often. We just got to stay ahead of those things. The standard itself is a certification, and that's the other thing that we're seeing supply chains probably going to benefit from. So I look at our own business, anyone that's sort of doing work for us, we all want to assess whether or not they introduce any cyber risk. If I'm going to share information with them, I really need to know that they'll take that seriously and be safe and have got the right systems in place. Traditionally, you'll ask questions, you'll send out surveys, you'll maybe do some testing. If someone's not honest or truthful in that response, or they miss something, you might miss it. Certification is a way of saying, look, if you can just tell me that you are certified against that level, I'm really comfortable with that level, and we'll move on. That's better than answering a big spreadsheet, because you know that for them to attest to something as a director, they're not going to do that unless they're genuinely able to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. And in terms of, I guess, moving forward, I'm conscious of time as well, where do you see things for this year in particular? Like, I'm not going to ask you to crystal ball too far, but, pretty much every time we've asked you, where you see things going, it ends up being true. I think, if we rewind to the last podcast, you did say that there's, new legislation coming in. I knew you were working on that standard, so that's been fantastic. But where do you see things it's an ever-evolving pace, industry in place, but it's also very slow in that, business owners don't really understand until they've been impacted. Legislation isn't driven until there's a proper standard. Like there's lots of slow things that are happening, but where do you see 2025 and maybe even a little bit into 26?
There's a few things that we're focusing on ourselves, and I think that most businesses will want to do the same. Data governance is something that none of us have really, large businesses will have focused on it at some point. A lot of the rest of us are now realising, okay, we've got to deal with this. So all the privacy reforms are all trying to force us to manage information better and protect it. It's really hard to protect and manage something where you don't know where it is and you can't identify what is in your platforms, in your systems, in your software. You don't know who owns it, and you're certainly not sure how it's being managed. So we've got to get better at those things.
Yep.
And that can start with having a view of where's the most important information I keep in my business. What of that information is PII, personal, that I have, under law, a right to, an obligation to maintain and secure? Who owns it and who can access it, and how would it be used, and can I do those things? So there's a lot of work around just understanding those things, because if you know those things, you can start to do things like protect them.
Yep.
Backups. If you knew that of all my backups, there's 2 that absolutely have the keys to all of the most important assets I have, and they're sort of here, you make sure that they're going to be protected properly. So there's a lot of work there. AI is going to have a fairly big impact this year on cybersecurity. I'm seeing it roll out now. For the benefit of all of us is one great thing. Some of the best technologies out there, you'll start to see them embedding AI in ways that actually make them better and faster and more accurate, especially in the world of endpoint detection and response. We're talking about, is someone watching your data and how quickly can they see things? You'll start to see AI pick up and improve on that. Because at the moment, a lot of that is based on people.
Yep.
Having people who can interpret and then action things. When you've got someone that can do that real time in that type of world, you've got to be a game changer. At the same time, the bad guys are doing the same thing.
Yep.
They're trying to leverage that same technology to be faster at attacking us, faster to find a weakness, faster to execute on that. So it'll be this shift to letting our technology really defend us, and you'll just have to be investing in the right tech to do that. And other things, you're going to have to make sure that you're doing those fundamentals and you have a focus around governance and risk management around IT. If something goes wrong, you should expect that someone's going to ask questions and want to have a look at what you've done in the past. And if someone does an investigation into, well, were you prepared and were you doing enough, and you weren't, that's when you're going to start to see some of these penalties start to come through as, you knew that there was an expectation, you decided to risk not doing it, and there's a consequence. Yep.
Fantastic, Darren. Look, I'm probably going to have to cut this one now, and because we'll keep the series going. Part 4, I reckon, will be everyone that keeps saying, look, keep asking Darren to come back on. So thank you so much for sharing the insights. And Darren at McGrathNicol has been a huge supporter of all businesses, and very, very much admire what you give to businesses, and supporter of everything to do with cyber. So Darren, really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thanks, Nigel. Love coming in and doing this.
Look forward to part 4.
Cheers.
Thanks, Darren.